We wanted to be the biggest band in the world.
It's like my life flashing in front of me.
It was pure inspiration.
The Hysteria record was the album that we've always been wanting to make ever since we formed the band.
When we first got together to follow up Pyromania, which is basically what it wasn't Hysteria at the time, it was just going to be the next album. We hadn't got a clue what we were doing, to be quite honest. You know, you got to remember that it was a year since the last album came out. We spent a year on the road. We literally finished in Bangkok in like the second week of February 1984 and flew straight to Dublin, Ireland.
We first started writing songs for the Hysteria album with Mutt Lang in Dublin. And a lot of them were pretty much finished. But we knew at that point that Mutt was not going to produce the album, which is why we thought that Jim Steinman might be a good idea. For one reason or another, Jim just didn't work out. And it was mainly, I think it was our mistake in the first place for thinking that it would work, because Jim just came from a completely different school of thought that was more just vibe and song orientated, whereas we've always been more, it's the sound of the record. We go into great detail on every single element that makes up the song. So there was always conflict there. The songs just weren't sounding the way that we wanted them to sound.
So we parted company with Jim Steinman, and then we worked with Nigel Green, who was Def Leppard's engineer on Pyromania and High and Dry. And we were getting some good stuff with him, but it really was sounding like Pyromania 2.
Every other rock band in the world has just made Pyromania 2. We really can't go anywhere near that. We've got to do something a bit more kind of outreaching, a bit cooler, deeper, different kind of influences.
We worked with him for a while, then there was the massive tragedy of Rick having his accident.
You know, that really made the whole thing very different for me. Just that, a different kind of pressure. You know, one where I was questioning whether I could even do this anymore.
It was a slow process of worrying whether he was going to actually live. Once we got through that, then then you start thinking, how's he going to play drums? You know, but it wasn't our place to say, Rick, really sorry, mate, but you can't carry on with this sort of thing, you know.
I think Mutt had seen him in the hospital and said, you know, you can do this with all the electronic stuff, and he got this idea in his head. And when me and Steve Clark went to visit Rick, he was all bound up like a mummy, but he said he was practicing on the head. He had a pillow, and he said, I'm going to play and I'm going to use this foot instead of this arm, so I've got to get this thing kind of working.
And basically, I realized that I could do certain things with my hand that I could never do before. And then I was always very right-footed whenever I played football. And I realized that I could kick nearly as well with my left leg as I could with my right. And this was all this sort of, this curve, this momentum that I got. And then I started to realize, okay, all the information's in my head.
And he practiced so much. We used to live in the same house, me, Rick and Steve. We shared this house, and when he was practicing, and other stuff, normal stuff, like cutting a loaf of bread, shoelaces, all of these things, standing up. You know, we stand up like that. When Rick first stood up, the balance is all off all of a sudden. So he had to overcome so much before he even got on a drum kit. But that was his prime thing. It's like, you know, shoelaces, bread, whatever, that doesn't really matter. I just want to play drums. So he would get up, we'd hear him like banging away at 8 in the morning. He'd play all day, he'd get frustrated, he'd be swearing, oh, I can't do this, da da da, and then he'd be back the next morning doing it. And he finally started kind of working. He got a rhythm, then all of a sudden he's playing, and it was amazing. It was just amazing to see that happen.
The thing that projected me forward was I had to stop comparing myself to how I used to be, and I had to stop comparing myself to others. And as soon as I stopped doing that, then it was almost this feeling of celebrating uniqueness.
I remember that being a not a great period until he came back to the studio and he was like just sat on the couch, didn't do much, but he was there, you know, and that really helped. And then after, I'd guess it was sometime in 1985, Mutt Lange said, "Hey, I'm back. If you want me to come back, I'll come back in." And so he took over. So we kind of started. We didn't realise it, but we kind of started again.
I had to figure out what it was I could actually play. You know, most bands, they always complain that the drummer's too busy. In my case, it was the opposite. It was like trying to busy things up where they needed to be. And it was an interesting puzzle.
When we started the album with Steinman, he was playing a traditional Ludwig drum kit or whatever with 2 arms. And we would use a certain amount of programming on certain types of songs. If we wanted them to be robotic, we would be enhancing what he was doing with machinery stuff. But once he had his accident, we just started working with machines. And a lot of it coincided with common sense. You know, first of all, Rick's relearning to play. So this is obviously, we need to think more electronically. And people like Roger Taylor from Queen were starting to use machines.
When Mutt came back in, it was a different era. You know, we started on a Fairlight machine, which is what you used to use as a sampler. A Fairlight 1 and a 2, and then we went to Synclavier. So all these technology was going crazy.
And we were hearing these new bands making totally different kind of music to us, bands like Frankie Goes to Hollywood or the Human League, using all this electronic stuff and thinking, wouldn't it be great to actually incorporate that into rock, you know? And Mutt was very open to that, and he knew that we were, so there was never a kind of a juxtaposition of like butting heads, like, no, can't go there, we've got to be this traditional rock band. It's like, no, we need to be standalone. We wanted to be as out there as Queen were, you know, we wanted to be as out there as Kate Bush was, but obviously more of a rock band than Kate Bush, as much as we love her work.
We wanted to make a rock version of Thriller that had 7 singles on it and that would, you know, please every genre of music.
We realised the type of album that we'd sort of committed to is, you know, there's no going back. A lot of it was groundbreaking, stuff that with our recording techniques, nobody had ever really done before. But it was creating a sound that nobody had heard before. And to get through that process, sometimes you could spend 3 or 4 days just solely on one little thing to realise that's not the right way to go.
We used bass Rockmans, guitar Rockmans, we used Galley and Kruger amps that were this big, with cushions stuffed against the speaker, with the mics going into the headphone socket. It's kind of like found sound. We were using guitars, but we weren't just sticking them into Marshalls. We would if we needed to, we wanted that sound, but to get the sound of the jangle on songs like Hysteria, you needed to go in a different direction. And you know, by the time we'd finished doing that song, there's 11 different orchestrated guitar parts, which these 2 guys have got to replicate on stage as best they can. You know, but we were all about making an album, not how we're going to do it live. It didn't matter.
I took a handful of drumsticks and launched them at the control room window.
20 grand for this, and it's like, oh my God.
You know, sit there mentally masturbating for 2 hours.
I never thought that we were a sexy band, but I think we have some sexy songs.